Imagine being suspended in total darkness, thousands of feet below the surface. The only sound is the deafening roar of freezing water pounding against your body. And your lifeline, the one thing keeping you from falling into the abyss, is slowly failing. We often look at the underground world as a playground for adventure, a place to test our limits. But the Earth doesn't care about our bravery, and it certainly doesn't forgive our mistakes. Today, we're descending into 3 stories where the line between an adrenaline rush and a fight for survival didn't just blur, it vanished completely. Welcome back to Pause Inside. Today, we're looking at 3 caving expeditions that spiraled into absolute nightmares. The first story, in particular, is heartbreaking. It's not just about the physical danger, it highlights the incredible lengths a true friend will go to save someone they love. But as we'll see, sometimes even the greatest effort isn't enough against the raw power of nature. And for the other 2, well, they're even harder to listen to. Let's go back to March 1997. 2 friends, Andrew and Attila, were gearing up for a trip that had been on their radar for weeks. They were headed to Real Well in Tennessee. If you know anything about this cave, you know it's famous for its entrance, a massive 160-foot pit that you have to descend right off the bat. Andrew was 32, a seasoned caver who took the lead on planning. Attila was younger, 26, and still relatively new to the sport. He'd only been in about 5 caves before this, but his enthusiasm was infectious. He trusted Andrew, and Andrew trusted their preparation. They felt ready, or at least they thought they were. On morning of March 18th, the weather was already turning against them. It was overcast with a persistent cold drizzle. As they hiked up to the cave entrance, they could hear it before they saw it, the ominous roar of water crashing down into the pit. It was louder than usual. Andrew actually paused at the edge. He looked at the gear they had laid out and then at the wetsuits sitting in the trunk of their car. In the caving world, hindsight is always 20/20. Looking at the gray sky and feeling the chill in the air, they made a decision that would haunt the rest of this story. They decided they didn't need the wetsuits. They thought they could handle the cold. They rigged their ropes directly in the path of the waterfall. They knew they'd get soaked, but the adrenaline of the descent masked the danger. Attila, in his rush to get going, even forgot his helmet, a massive oversight, but they were chasing the thrill. Andrew went down first. Immediately, the cold water hit him like a physical blow, soaking his clothes and chilling him to the bone before he even reached the bottom. The waterfall wasn't just a trickle, it was a torrent. Attila followed, sliding down that rope which now felt like a slippery, freezing snake in his hands. When they landed at the bottom, the cave itself was stunning. Damp walls gleaming in their headlamp light, but the beauty was deceptive. The cold was already gnawing at them. They explored for only about 30 minutes before Attila started falling apart. He was trembling violently, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely speak. He looked at Andrew and stammered, "I can't stay down here. I think I need to get out." Andrew knew immediately that this was bad. "All right," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll get the ropes ready." But the waterfall was still roaring, and even Andrew's experienced hands were starting to stiffen. And this is where the equipment choices became fatal. Attila rigged his climbing system way too quickly. He was using a chaotic mix of gear, a commercial seat harness connected to a hand-tied chest harness, and a chain of 6 non-locking carabiners. It was an improvisation born of inexperience. As Attila started climbing back up, he was fighting a losing battle against gravity and the freezing water pounding on his head. Halfway up the rope, he stopped. His muscles were burning, and the cold had sapped his strength. Worst of all, his gear began to fail. That long chain of carabiners unhooked, leaving him suspended by his safety tether, his cow's tail, which was stretched so tight he couldn't reach his ascender to climb any higher. He was stuck, hanging in a freezing waterfall, unable to go up or down. Andrew shouted from below, "Attila, come back down if you need to." But the roar of the water swallowed his words. After agonizing minutes, he heard Attila scream back 2 words that made his blood run cold. "I can't." Andrew didn't hesitate. He clipped into the rope and began the grueling climb up to his friend. Every foot he gained was a war against the freezing deluge. When he finally reached Attila, the sight was grim. Attila was limped in his harness. He was conscious, but barely. Hypothermia had set in deep. He was pale, lethargic, and shivering uncontrollably. Andrew realized he had to perform a pick-off maneuver. This is a technical rescue where you attach the stranded climber to your own harness and descend together. But trying to do this while hanging 80 feet in the air, being battered by freezing water with numb hands, it was impossible. He tried and tried to clip Attila to his harness, but his fingers just wouldn't work. His own strength was fading fast as the hypothermia began to creep into his own body. Desperate, Andrew tried to climb out while towing Attila, hoping to pull them both to the surface. He made it maybe 15 feet before his body gave out. He was shaking so violently he couldn't hold on. He was faced with an impossible choice: die together or try to survive to get help. In a last-ditch effort, Andrew swung himself over to a small ledge, unclipped from the rope, and collapsed. He passed out almost immediately from the cold. When he woke up, hours had passed. He crawled back to the edge and looked down. Attila was still hanging there, motionless. Andrew knew he was gone. With trembling hands, Andrew re-rigged his gear and made the agonizing climb out alone. He collapsed at the surface and called for help, but by the time rescue teams arrived, it was simply a recovery mission. Attila had succumbed to the cold hours earlier. It's a brutal reminder of how small mistakes, leaving the wetsuits, rushing the gear setup, can compound into a tragedy. It's terrifying how quickly things can go wrong underground. Before we move to the next story, I want to ask you, what scares you more? The idea of being trapped in a tight, dry space where you can't move, or being lost underwater in the pitch black? Let me know in the comments below. While Andrew and Attila were fighting the cold in a vertical pit, our next story takes us to a place that looks like paradise, but hides a deadly labyrinth beneath the surface. We're going to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, to the Sistema Sac Actual. It is the longest underwater cave system in the world, over 200 miles of flooded tunnels. In December 2004, a group of 9 divers arrived at Cenote Calimba to explore this network. These weren't amateurs. They were seasoned divers who had built a strong camaraderie. They felt invincible. The plan was precise. Team A would go in first, led by a guide, and place markers, little plastic discs called cookies, to show the way. Team B would follow behind, trace the path, and then turn back. They checked their air, their regulators, and their spools. They entered the crystal-clear water feeling confident, but as any cave diver will tell you, the cave doesn't care about your confidence. Team A went in, placing yellow cookies on the guidelines at every intersection. They did their job perfectly. Team B entered shortly after, following the breadcrumbs. But about 30 minutes into the dive, Team B reached a critical intersection. Here is where the nightmare began. Instead of turning right to follow the exit path, they made a mistake. They turned left. It seems like such a small error, right? A simple left instead of a right? But underwater, that mistake is a death sentence. They swam for another 25 minutes, covering 1,400 feet deeper into the cave system, completely unaware that they were moving away from the exit. Slowly, the realization hit them. The landmarks didn't look right. Confusion turned into anxiety, and anxiety turned into panic. And when you panic underwater, you breathe faster. You burn through your air supply at double or triple the normal rate. To make matters worse, their frantic movements kicked up silt from the cave floor. In seconds, the crystal-clear water turned into a brown fog. Visibility dropped to 0. They couldn't tell up from down, left from right. Team A, meanwhile, had already surfaced. They removed their markers, assuming Team B was right behind them. They had no idea their friends were still down there, hopelessly lost in the dark. Back in the cave, Team B realized they were in trouble. They split into 2 pairs to search for a line, any line that would lead them home. The lead pair swam desperately through the murk, searching for those yellow cookies. They found nothing, just cold, oppressive darkness. One diver's tank ran low.
then empty. He started buddy breathing, sharing a single regulator with his partner, passing it back and forth with every breath. At the surface, Team A realized too much time had passed. The guide grabbed fresh tanks and plunged back into the water. He found the first pair of Team B divers just 200 feet from safety, gasping for air, terrified but alive. He asked them, "Where are the others?" The survivors gasped that they had seen the other pair's lights just a moment ago. The rescuers dove back down, pushing deeper into the silt, sweeping their lights through the gloom. And then they found them. Two figures suspended near the cave ceiling. Their regulators were floating uselessly beside them. Their tanks were completely empty. They had suffocated in the silence of the cave, just minutes away from rescue. It was a tragic chain reaction. One wrong turn, a bit of silt, and the unforgiving nature of a ceiling that won't let you surface. If you're finding these stories intense, please take a second to hit that like button. It helps us tell these stories, and it helps other people find them. And, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive.
Our final story shifts from the drowning depths to a different kind of claustrophobia, the kind that squeezes the air out of your lungs. It's January 1970. A group of 31 adventurers gathered in the snowy woods of New York to tackle Knox Cave. Now, Knox Cave had a reputation. It was famous for a feature called the gun barrel. The gun barrel is exactly what it sounds like. It's a keyhole-shaped tunnel only 18 inches wide that stretches on for 60 feet. To get through it, you have to crawl on your belly, arms pinned to your sides or stretched out in front, inching along like a worm. It separates the casual tourists from the hardcore cavers. 19 members of the group decided they were brave enough to try it. Among them was 14-year-old Peter. This was Peter's first real caving trip, and he wanted to prove himself. He watched the others slither into the hole and disappear. When it was his turn, he took a deep breath and pushed inside. The rock pressed down on his back and chest. The air was thin and stale. He used his elbows and knees to drag himself forward, scraping against the jagged walls. He was doing great. He was just 8 feet from the exit, so close he could probably hear the voices of the people who had already made it through. And then disaster struck. As Peter pushed forward, his knee slipped into a narrow crevice in the floor of the tunnel. He tried to yank it out, but it wouldn't budge. He twisted, he pulled, he shoved. Nothing. His knee was wedged tight in the rock. Panic is immediate in a space that tight. Peter called out, "I'm stuck!" The group ahead of him stopped and turned back, but here was the problem. Peter was blocking the only way through. No one could get past him to help from the front, and the people behind him were trapped in the tunnel with nowhere to go. The cavers tried everything. They pulled on his leg, they tried to shift his hips, but every movement made Peter scream in pain. He wasn't going anywhere. Hours passed. The cold of the cave began to seep into them. Remember, it's January. The temperature inside was dropping, and they were all lying motionless on the cold stone. Hypothermia became a very real threat, not just for Peter, but for everyone trapped in the queue behind him. Outside, the rest of the group realized something was wrong. One of them crawled back in to check and found the bottleneck. He scrambled out to raise the alarm. By the time police and firefighters arrived, it was late afternoon, but when they looked at the gun barrel, they realized this wasn't going to be a normal rescue. They couldn't just grab Peter and pull. The friction would tear his leg apart. Peter, by this point, was delirious. He was exhausted, freezing, and terrified. He started hallucinating, screaming that a snake was biting him in the dark. There was no snake, just the agony of his trapped leg and his mind breaking under the stress. The rescuers knew they were racing the clock. If they didn't get him out soon, people were going to start dying of exposure. Finally, around 8:30 p.m., 7 hours after Peter got stuck, the firefighters came up with a simple, brilliant idea. They sent down a thermos of soapy water. The cavers inside poured the soapy liquid all around Peter's trapped leg. A firefighter tied a rope around Peter's ankle, and they coordinated a 1-2-3 pull. With the lubrication and the adrenaline of a final attempt, Peter's knee popped free. A wave of relief washed over the group, but they still had to be careful. They slowly guided him the rest of the way through the gun barrel.
One by one, the trapped cavers behind him crawled out into the fresh air, shivering but alive. Peter suffered fractures and severe bruising, and he had to be treated for hypothermia, but he survived. It's a terrifying example of how a fun adventure can turn into a 7-hour ordeal where the earth literally refuses to let you go. These 3 stories, Real Well, Cenote Kalimba, and Knox Cave, all share a common thread. It's not about ghosts or monsters. The horror comes from the environment itself. It comes from the cold water, the silt, the narrow rock. It comes from the realization that we are very small and the earth is very big and indifferent. Whether it's the loyalty of a friend trying to pull you from a waterfall or the panic of losing your way in the dark, these moments remind us to respect the wild places we explore. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please check out the other survival stories on the channel. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.